Morning, everybody. It's really incredible to see so many people here and from such a wide, from across the globe. It's fantastic. I'm Marianne. I'm also referred to as Maz. They are not two mystical creatures. I am the same person. And I'm with this hat on. I'm the vice chair of BAMT and also now the lead trustee for equality, diversity, and inclusion. So I'm going to introduce how we got to where we are. And then I will hand over to Andrew, who will present the findings of the report. And then Andrew, Claire and I will be available to answer any questions that the membership might have. As was said previously, I'm repeating what John's already said, but please put any questions that you'd like asked in the chat. We will try and answer as many of them as we can, but we may not get to all of them, and apologies if we don't get to yours. Andrew has taken on that he will respond to any questions that aren't covered today over email over the coming couple of weeks. And also, as was said before, if you have a question that you don't want to put your name to, or you don't want to be asked, you don't want to ask publicly, send a private message to Andrew in the chat and he will make sure that your question is answered. On the 25th of May this year, George Floyd was killed by a policeman in Minneapolis, and the video of his killing was circulated across the globe. It was a very distressing video and was quite traumatic for a lot of people who viewed it, especially people from what I understand in the black community. And there were protests that were widespread throughout the US and also in the UK. I think the way to kind of sum this up is that many of the global population and many in our music therapy profession experience racism towards themselves, their loved ones, their families. This is something that lots of people already knew about. But if we're being really honest, what felt like all of a sudden, the rest of us who were blinded by our privilege suddenly caught up. At this point in time, I was chairing BAMT for 6 weeks as John was on paternity leave. At the time, we received an overwhelming and very strong response from our membership. And it was clear immediately that there was a demand not only for BAMT to take clear action, but also to demonstrate that we were doing so and to let our members know what was happening and how we intended to kind of sort this out, in effect, which is absolutely as it should be. It provides members the opportunity to point to their professional body and show that we as an organisation are taking a lead and being proactive in facing this on and doing something about it. As Andrew touched on, BAMT have been talking about diversity issues for a while, as well as all of the work that Andrew has done since becoming CEO. Things came up at previous board away days, and also AGM and the Training and Education Committee did a lot of work in a diversity forum, which was reported back to the board and which we had begun to consider starting work on. But again, I think it's fair to say that the response we received from our members around the time of the protests helped renew BAMT's focus into actions and plans. So I began discussions with Andrew immediately and the rest of the board and John when he was back, and we discussed together as to how to effectively respond to what our members were saying. I think the key word to say here is effectiveness. We don't really want BAMT to engage in kind of token projects without truly addressing the depth of the intersectional issues that are related to diversity, you know, including and not limited to racism, homophobia, transphobia, gender discrimination, all of the things our members told us about. We had been talking about it before, but we didn't really know the exact way this was manifesting until our members told us, but more on that shortly. I firstly want to say that I'm really proud that in our CEO, Andrew was keen, and along with the rest of the board, to consider diversity systematically and in a way that can affect real change. We were all quite aware quite quickly that this is going to be a lot of work and it's going to take a long time. But I'm really, really proud that the board and Andrew haven't shied away from this and have been kind of very upfront in, you know, if we're going to do this, we need to do this properly. It needs to be effective. I requested to take on the portfolio of lead trustee for equality, diversity and inclusion because I'd been at the forefront of the membership communications during the time of the widespread protests, and I wanted to continue listening as best I could in the way that I'd hoped we'd started to do. And the board agreed that I could take on this portfolio. So how it works is, while Andrew is leading on the operations and what we're going to do day to day, I am overseeing the overall strategy, but in close consultation with Andrew and the rest of the board for how BAMT effectively tackles exactly what has been fed back to us by the membership. Obviously, I'm white, as is Andrew, and currently the rest of the board. So I don't have all of the answers, and I really can't pretend that I do. BAMT can only respond effectively if those of us who are elected to senior positions within the organisation listen and work collaboratively with the BAMT members, and that's exactly what we intend to do. Kind of as a side point, the board makeup will also need to change over time to better reflect the diversity of our membership. So that is something we're aware of, and we know it needs to change. We had begun reflecting as a team a few months ago on the systemic societal manifestations of racism, all the way from how music is taught in schools, who has access to lessons, who is able to continue with their ongoing training and who is able to afford to do so, how access to elite institutions, music schools is not open to all. As well as by the time people get to music therapy auditions, their training, and then beyond into their working lives. This is something that we had talked about, but also that our BAMT membership have told us now about, and exactly how this is manifesting. Commissioning the membership survey, which we're reporting on today, is the first step of several that BAMT would like to make over the coming weeks, the coming months, the coming years. How we proceed from here, how we respond to this survey most effectively, Andrew is going to briefly outline. It's a working project, it's a work in progress. We think effective change within the profession will be a marathon and not a sprint. And that's not to say that we can't continue engaging with the work in this time, because that's what we absolutely intend to do. But we think we're talking kind of cultural changes, systemic changes, which, with the best will in the world, cannot happen overnight. It will only be effective, our changes will only be effective if we can continue to collaborate with the BAMT membership. So I'd like to thank everyone that responded to our membership survey, and I hope very much that we can continue to collaborate over all stages of eradicating intersectional discrimination within our profession. We'll endeavour to communicate with our membership exactly what BAMT is doing and where we're up to with it, but I think our actions are what's most important. I hope that we can make every single person in our membership proud as we continue on this road together. So I'd like to express particular thanks to Andrew and to Claire for their brilliant work in collaborating this report. I was rather astounded when I first read it at the way that all of the data had been distilled down and presented in such a clear way. So the hugest thank you to both of them for all of their work on that. And now I'd like to hand over to Andrew, who's going to present the findings of the report. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Maz. We're going to have a slideshow with the sort of summary of the report, which I'll try and go through fairly quickly so that we've got more time for questions and answers. And just to reiterate what others have said is that if there are any questions that you'd rather not do at the AGM, as well as using the chat, please always feel free to email me at any time. And I promise I'll respond as soon as I possibly can. But certainly from the experience we've had up to date, the emails and the chats that I've had have been invaluable. So thank you. So I'm reporting as it is from the survey. So I'm going to firstly ask, please don't shoot the messenger. There are some very difficult issues that have come out, and for any of you who've already read the report, you'll have seen what some of those are. And during the slide presentation, I'd really like to use some of the quotes from the report So what I'll do each time is just pause so that people have time to read those. So just to explain why I suddenly go quiet. Building on what Maz just said, firstly, I'd like to thank you who contributed to this survey. It's really important that BAMT acknowledges that those within the profession have suffered racism, discrimination, inequality, ageism, ableism, etc. And these issues are not exclusively historical, they're continuing today. So we can't use the excuse of, oh, well, that's how it used to be or whatever else. The evidence shows from the survey and from the conversations that I've had that unfortunately, these are still major issues. And it's unacceptable. And in no way does BAMT condone any such behaviour. It is clear that vital change is needed, and we've got to ensure the safety and well-being of all who access and practice music therapy. And as I initially alluded to, this report is the first stage that the BAMT are taking in order to better understand and plan how to address the change required. As a result, this report does not seek to state recommendations or next stages. Instead, it provides a clearer picture of the areas of concern. And I'll go on to say what the initial actions will be at the end. You can see the overview. We had over 500 responses. And as you can see, that's been just under 50% of the BAMT membership. A lot of people have said what a success the survey has been and how amazing it is to get just under 50%. I'm really sorry, but that's not good enough. We have to aim to make sure this is an issue for 100% of BAMT membership. And I will continue to push and push on the issues that we've got to do something about. Thanks, Claire. So what has resulted from the survey is 7 main themes: training, diversity in professional practice, support, CPD, awareness, representation, and equality. Thanks, Claire. As I've said, discrimination is an issue that we've got to respond to. Within music therapy, we have problems related to race, disability, sexuality, age, gender, socioeconomic financial issues, training, and musical backgrounds. And I'll just pause for you to read some comments from the survey. Okay, thank you, Claire. The vast majority of respondents mentioned training. The core areas of note were categorized as inaccessibility of courses and a lack of diversity within training institutions. And again, this is highlighted by these comments. Thanks, Claire. There are many, many issues that look at the inaccessibility of training courses. And you can see that there's a list of some of those there. I'm not going to use the time to go through those now. And as you're all aware, we'll be sending these slides out to all members. So you can have a read through, or indeed, they're all within the report. Thanks, Claire. There's a big call for diversity within training institutions, especially greater diversity of placements, working with those from different cultural backgrounds to the therapist, improved diversity of teaching staff, visiting lecturers, placement supervisors, peer groups, etc. And some of the issues about culture-centered practice, how to use English with non-English speakers, acknowledgement that course material is taught through the lens of Western classical music, and recognition of neo-colonialism in music therapy. And again, two really good quotes that highlight this. Thanks, Claire. We know that problems exist in the diversity within professional practice, and this is institutional. It's about resources and supervision, lack of diversity, etc. And BAMT have been asked to reflect and discuss the past. To be honest, I think there has been a lot of talk in the past, a lot of head scratching, but I promise you this is going to result in action. We've been asked to establish a diversity charter, an EDI strategy, acknowledge and explore lack of diversity on the Board of Trustees, and we have started to address that and will continue to lead on tackling lack of diversity, a call to establish a diversity officer, and a request to collaborate and form partnerships with other non-music therapy organisations. And if you haven't seen within Bulletin, I think we've one of the best things that we've done recently is join the EDI Music Studies Network, which again I put a link in the Bulletin that I would advise everybody to join up. It is an amazing network. Specific concerns were raised about support, particularly resources, need for greater support and resources for both newly qualified and self-employed therapists, a request for more access to more resources in Welsh, more online provision, and an increase in free access to research, journal, other academia, etc. Some of the financial issues were for funding for research within BAME communities, support for access to training, as well as funding to assist during training, more discounts, support for the purchase of equipment, the need to address difficulty faced by trainees who are having to work multiple jobs whilst training, support for BAMT and HCPC costs, and to explore the possibility of offering paid work-based placements on training courses. I'm going to add a caveat here, is that we're going to make sure that we look at all of these issues, but we will do our best. But some things may well be out of our control, but we'll carry on campaigning. Some of these issues are reflected in these comments. as you can see, some really strong and really important things for us to take note of. Thanks, Claire. There are many issues around CPD, and I'm really hoping that with new staff, BAMT will significantly increase the CPD we offer and be far more responsive to what members want, with an aim to be as accessible as possible, and that does include cost. So an increase in online CPD, a suggestion for online certification for international applicants, improving the access for self-employed therapists, and I think we're starting to overcome the access draining due to geographical location, just because of, as I say, so much more online and how we've had to act because of COVID. Cost is obviously a big issue, and that is something, particularly with BAMT CPD, that we will take into consideration. But the presentation needs to change too. We've got to increase diversity and inclusivity of presenters, much better range, and as I say, hopefully we overcome the not just in London problem that has existed in the past. And a real view on accessibility, particularly support for different learning strategies and the needs of people with visual impairment and dyslexia. Thanks, Claire. Carrying on, it's been suggested that we need to look far more at resources for self-care and mental health support for therapists. As I say, better access for disabled therapists, and training in all of these areas. Really looking at bias and racism in the workplace, but also all of the other diversity issues that, as I say, there's plenty of evidence we've got to do something about. Yet again, another quote that I think really captures this. So theme 5 is around awareness, covering the areas outlined here: the professional practice, the language and culture of how we are, and also our outreach, and particularly the promotion of music therapy. And again, these are reflected in the next 2 comments. Thanks, Claire. Not only with professional practice, but also the image and projection of music therapy is really important, and the representation through professional practice. And we have to challenge and diversify the outward image of the profession. And that's got to be with an increase presence on social media, the website, etc., to ensure that publicity material reflects diversity of both the profession and of our service users. Thanks, Claire. There's a number of really important issues around equality, including pay, job security, improving access for those that may face social stigmas, and problems with MTs around ageism, etc. Again, there's a great outline of all of this within the report, and again, I'll be sharing the slides. Thanks, Claire. There are some obvious problems around gender, and for BAMT in particular, a call to be inclusive and look at the profession and support the profession to be far more diverse. I think that the use of online resources is going to be invaluable, but also, looking at things like access to our conferences, etc., which again, I hope that we're starting to address. And in particular with that last comment, that I really do hope that we're going to make some headway with that, which I've already spoken about and why it's important. Thanks, Claire. So what are our next steps? Firstly, it's really important that we have a realistic timescale and appreciate this will be a marathon, not a sprint. Some things will take years to address, and I'm thinking particularly of things like music education in schools, which has to be something that we campaign about and take a very strong stance. But as Maz said to start off with, this will now be integral to BAMT's work. This will be ongoing, for many years. So very early next year, I will start to set up networks and working groups on specific themes and issues, but also very similar to the COVID-19 directory, we'll also start a directory of resources on the website. And please send me anything that you would like added to that. And I hope that it's as successful as the COVID-19 directory. What we have to acknowledge is we will need to bring in expertise. And I will look at experts who could lead things like roundtables, that if we always do what we've always done, etc. And I do think that some of the support we're going to need to properly get improvements is going to come from outside of the profession, but obviously with all members included.